Hello, I'm Dr. Anthony Fauci, and I want to say something this morning that may completely change the way you think about aging alone. What I'm about to share with you is probably not what your doctor told you at your last checkup, and it's definitely not what the mainstream health industry spends much time talking about. If you are a man over 60 living on your own, or if you love someone who is, then the next several minutes could genuinely change the direction of the years ahead. Here's the truth, and it may surprise you. According to a landmark study published by the National Institute on Aging, men over 65 who live alone face a 45% higher risk of accelerated physical and cognitive decline. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. The men in that same group who adopted 5 specific lifestyle practices didn't just close that gap. In many cases, they actually outperformed married men their own age on major health measures: strength, memory, cardiovascular endurance, emotional resilience, and overall function. And today, I'm going to walk you through exactly what those 5 practices are, counting down from surprisingly powerful all the way to what I consider the single most important thing an older man living alone can do for his health. Now I want to tease one thing before we begin, because I do not want you clicking away before we reach the end. The number 1 item on this list is something almost every older man is currently getting wrong. Not because he's careless, not because he lacks discipline, but because he was given outdated advice, possibly by a well-meaning physician, possibly decades ago. And correcting it could add functional, independent, high-quality years to your life. So stay with me all the way through. Before we dive in, I want to ask you something directly, and I truly mean it. I read the comments on this channel. So if you're watching, drop your age below and tell me this. Do you live alone right now, or are you watching for someone you care about? I want to know who's here with me today, because this content is made for you, and your story matters. I've spent more than 2 decades working with older adults in clinical and surgical settings. I've seen decline up close, and more importantly, I've seen what thriving looks like. I've seen men in their late 70s and 80s who move with confidence, think clearly, sleep deeply, and live with a real sense of purpose. And I want that for every man listening right now. Let's begin with something that surprises almost every patient I discuss it with: the profound and measurable effect of morning sunlight on the aging male body. I know what some of you are thinking. Sunlight? That's the big breakthrough? But stay with me, because the science here is far more sophisticated than a simple go outside more message. What researchers have discovered about men specifically, and older men living alone in particular, is remarkable. A study from researchers at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in California found that consistent exposure to natural outdoor light within the first 90 minutes of waking directly regulates the circadian rhythm, your body's internal 24-hour clock. And after the age of 65, that clock begins to drift. It loses precision the way an old wristwatch starts losing time. And when your circadian rhythm drifts, almost everything downstream begins to suffer. Your cortisol rises at the wrong times. Your testosterone rhythm weakens. Your sleep quality declines. Your blood sugar regulation worsens. And inflammatory markers, those chemical signals associated with aging and disease, begin to climb. This matters even more for men who live alone. Researchers at University College London found that socially isolated older men had significantly more disrupted circadian rhythms than men living with a partner. Why? Because when you live with someone, you naturally benefit from external time cues. Regular meals, shared conversation, household rhythm, predictable routines. Those things act like anchors for your biological clock. When you live alone, you have to create those anchors deliberately. I had a patient, I'll call him Raymond, a 73-year-old retired electrician from Knoxville, Tennessee. Raymond came to me complaining of fatigue, low mood, and what he described as not feeling like myself anymore. His labs looked fine. His heart was strong. Nothing obvious was wrong. But as we talked, I learned that Raymond hadn't been outside before 10 in the morning in years. He would wake up, make coffee, sit in front of the television, and drift through the first few hours of his day under dim indoor light. So we made one simple change. Every morning, right after waking, Raymond started sitting on his back porch for 20 minutes with his coffee. No television. No phone. No distractions. Just him and the morning sky. Within 6 weeks, he told me he was sleeping better than he had in years. His energy improved. His mood lifted. He felt steadier, clearer, more alive. And the science explains why. Morning light suppresses melatonin at the right biological time, triggers a healthy cortisol awakening response, and helps set off a hormonal cascade that improves everything from insulin sensitivity to testosterone timing across the rest of the day. So the practical takeaway is simple. Within 90 minutes of waking, get outside for at least 15 to 20 minutes in natural daylight. Not by a window. Not through glass. Actually outside, because glass filters some of the wavelengths your brain needs most. And if you pair that light exposure with a little movement, a walk, a few minutes of stretching, even a slow lap around the block, the effect gets even stronger. Stanford researchers found that combining morning light with mild movement can amplify circadian benefit by up to 60% compared to either habit alone. Now let's talk about something that sits right at the intersection of aging, nutrition, and energy, and that is anabolic resistance. This is one of the most important concepts older men need to understand, especially those living alone, because it explains why so many men feel weaker, smaller, and more tired even when they think they're eating fairly well. Anabolic resistance means that after about age 65, your muscles stop responding to protein the way they used to. Picture a door that once swung open easily every time protein knocked. As you age, that door becomes stiff. It sticks. The same amount of protein that once helped maintain muscle now produces a much weaker effect. Research from a University of Texas medical branch found that men over 70 may require up to 50% more protein per meal to stimulate the same muscle-building response as a much younger man eating that exact same meal. And the sad reality is that many older men are eating less protein than they did when they were younger, not more. Appetite decreases. Cooking for one can feel like a chore. Meals become smaller, simpler, and sometimes nutritionally weaker. Social eating declines. And for men living alone, that pattern becomes especially common. Studies have shown that older men who live alone consume significantly less protein on average than men living with a spouse or family. And that gap matters, because it is one of the major drivers of sarcopenia, the age-related loss of muscle mass and strength that contributes to falls, fractures, loss of independence, and even cognitive decline. I think about a patient named George, a 78-year-old former high school football coach from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. George told me he felt like he was shrinking. Not in some dramatic overnight way, but slowly, steadily. His shirts hung differently. His grip felt weaker. He was getting winded on stairs. He couldn't open jars the way he used to. And like many men, he assumed this was just normal aging. But much of it wasn't inevitable. It was, at least in part, nutritional. We changed one major thing. Instead of letting most of his protein come at dinner, we spread it across all 3 meals. Research published in Clinical Nutrition shows that distributing 30 to 40 grams of protein evenly across breakfast, lunch, and dinner is far more effective for older adults than eating the same total amount in just 1 or 2 heavier meals. So George started having eggs and Greek yogurt in the morning, chicken or tuna at lunch, and salmon or lean red meat in the evening. 4 months later, his grip strength was measurably better. He was opening his own jars again. He felt stronger on his feet. But what struck me most was what he said in follow-up. He looked at me and said, "I feel like myself again." There's another layer here that matters. Whenever possible, pair protein with omega-3 rich foods like salmon, sardines, or a high-quality fish oil supplement. Research from Washington University School of Medicine suggests omega-3 fatty acids can help counteract anabolic resistance by reducing the low-grade inflammation that interferes with muscle signaling in aging tissue. In simple terms, they help make that stiff door easier to open. So if you're eating the protein but not getting the benefit you expect, this pairing can matter more than you think. And while we're here, let me pause for one quick moment and ask you something. If you've already learned at least one thing you didn't know before, if some part of this has made you stop and think, then please take 2 seconds and hit the like button. It may seem small, but it helps this message reach more older men who genuinely need it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do that too. We put out medically grounded content for people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, and I don't want you to miss what's coming next, because this next point is one of the most overlooked discoveries in aging science. Most people, including a surprising number of doctors, underestimate how deeply sleep changes after age 65. Not just the number of hours you sleep, but the structure of sleep itself. Your brain moves through several stages each night: light sleep, deep sleep, and REM sleep. And deep sleep is where some of the most important restorative work happens. Growth hormone release, tissue repair, memory consolidation, metabolic recovery, immune regulation. So much of that happens during deep sleep. And here's the alarming part. Researchers at Harvard Medical School's Division of Sleep Medicine have found that men lose roughly 60 to 70% of their deep sleep capacity between ages 40 and 70. By the time some men reach 75, they may be getting almost no meaningful deep sleep at all, even if they think they slept for a full 7 or 8 hours. Now add living alone to the equation. Research from the National Sleep Foundation shows that men who live alone report poorer sleep quality than partnered men. Part of that comes from less routine. Part of it comes from reduced feelings of safety and security. And part of it comes from elevated evening cortisol, the stress hormone, with no social buffer to bring it down. That matters because poor deep sleep doesn't just make you tired. Chronic deep sleep loss has been associated with a higher risk of cognitive decline, including Alzheimer's disease. Researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, have shown that during deep sleep, your brain activates its waste clearance process, often called the glymphatic system. Think of it like your brain's overnight cleaning cycle. When deep sleep is impaired, toxic proteins linked to Alzheimer's disease can accumulate more easily over time. I remember a patient named Harold, a 70-year-old retired accountant from Portland, Oregon. Harold told me he had no sleep problem at all. He fell asleep easily, stayed asleep most nights, and thought he was doing just fine. But when we looked more closely, the story changed. Harold was getting very little deep sleep. He was spending the night cycling through lighter stages and waking up exhausted, mentally foggy, and emotionally flat. We made 3 targeted changes. First, we moved his evening meal earlier, because eating too close to bedtime can disrupt deep sleep architecture. Second, we lowered the temperature in his bedroom to around 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, a range that appears to support deeper slow-wave sleep in older adults. Third, we added a morning walk after breakfast to strengthen his light exposure and circadian timing. 8 weeks later, Harold described the difference as life-changing. His thinking felt sharper. His mood improved. He wasn't just getting through the day anymore. He wanted to be part of it. And there's one more practical tool worth mentioning here. Magnesium glycinate, taken about 45 minutes before bed in the right dose, has shown promising results in improving sleep onset and sleep quality in older adults. It appears to support the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch that shifts the body from alert and stressed to calm and restorative. Pair that with consistent sleep and wake times, even on weekends, and the effect compounds. Now we come to the point I hinted at earlier, because this is the area where many older men are getting the wrong advice. When most people think about exercise after 65, they hear the same thing over and over: walk more, stay active, keep moving. And yes, walking matters. But there is one major problem with making walking the whole strategy. It does very little to preserve the thing older men lose fastest: fast-twitch muscle fibers. Your muscles contain 2 broad types of fibers. Slow-twitch fibers support endurance activities like walking, standing, and posture. Fast-twitch fibers support speed, power, reaction time, and the explosive force you need to catch yourself when you trip, get up off the floor after a fall, lift something heavy, or move quickly when life demands it. And after age 60, men lose fast-twitch fibers at roughly 3 times the rate they lose slow-twitch fibers. Research from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden found that by age 75, some men have lost up to 40% of their fast-twitch fiber population. These fibers don't just weaken. Many of them disappear. That's one reason falls become so dangerous. It's not only about balance. It's about reaction speed and power. When you stumble, it's your fast-twitch system that has to fire in milliseconds to save you. If that system is weak, the recovery comes too slowly, or not at all. So while walking is excellent for cardiovascular health and general activity, it is not enough to preserve this specific kind of muscular function. What does help? Resistance training, but done in a very particular way. Research from McMaster University, published in the Journal of Applied Physiology, shows that resistance training that includes intentional speed of movement is especially effective for preserving fast-twitch fibers in older adults. That means the weight or resistance does not need to be extreme, but the effort phase needs to be purposeful. You stand up with intent. You push with intent. You pull with intent. The nervous system responds differently when movement carries force and intention. I think of Walter, a 69-year-old retired military officer from Colorado Springs. Walter walked 4 miles a day, every day, without fail. By most standards, he looked fit. But he had a fall after catching his foot on an uneven stretch of sidewalk, and it rattled him. When I evaluated him, his cardiovascular conditioning was solid. His fast-twitch response was not. So we added just 2 resistance sessions per week. Not heavy bodybuilding workouts. Nothing extreme. Just simple bodyweight and controlled resistance movements done with deliberate speed. Squats with a strong stand-up phase, low step-ups, wall push-offs, basic pulling movements. Within 3 months, his reactive balance was measurably better. And his description stayed with me. He said, "I feel planted again. Like the ground is on my side." That is exactly what we want. And the prescription is simpler than most people think. 2 resistance training sessions per week can be enough when done correctly. Focus on compound movements that use multiple joints and muscle groups. Use good form. And during the effort phase, move with intent. Then pair that with the protein strategy we talked about earlier. Research has shown that consuming 30 to 40 grams of high-quality protein within a couple of hours after resistance training supports better muscle repair and preservation in men over 65. Those 2 habits together, smart resistance training and strategic protein, form one of the most powerful biological partnerships in healthy aging. And now we come to number 1, the single most important, most underestimated, and most biologically powerful truth about older men living alone. It is not a supplement. It is not a medication. It is not even exercise. It is social connection, and more specifically, the very real physical damage chronic loneliness inflicts on the aging male body at the cellular level. I want to be very clear here. This is not just a conversation about feelings. This is not me telling you to cheer up or simply be less lonely. This is measurable biology. A landmark meta-analysis published in PLOS Medicine, drawing from data on more than 3 million people, found that social isolation and loneliness were associated with a 26% increase in early mortality. The effect was comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That is not poetic language. That is the scale of the biological burden. But what matters even more is the mechanism. Researchers have found that when the brain perceives chronic isolation, it can trigger changes in gene expression, meaning loneliness actually alters which genes are more active and which genes are turned down. It tends to increase the activity of genes associated with inflammation and immune overactivation while reducing the activity of genes involved in antiviral defense and tissue repair. In plain English, loneliness pushes the body into a defensive state. It tells your biology to prepare for threat instead of healing. And when the body remains in that state for months or years, aging accelerates. One of the most striking examples of this involves telomeres, the protective caps at the ends of your DNA, often compared to the plastic tips on shoelaces. Telomere length is one of the most widely studied markers of biological aging. Research has shown that chronic loneliness is associated with faster telomere shortening, essentially adding extra years of wear and tear at the cellular level. That means isolation doesn't just feel bad. It leaves a measurable footprint on the body. And here is where older men living alone face a unique risk. Research from a University of Michigan's Institute for Social Research suggests that older men often have fewer social connections than older women after retirement or the loss of a spouse. Many men, especially from older generations, relied heavily on a wife or partner as their main social organizer, their primary confidant, sometimes even their only one. When that relationship ends, whether through death, divorce, or distance, many men find themselves in a kind of social poverty they were never taught how to name and were certainly never taught how to fix. I think of Thomas, a 77-year-old former engineer from Cincinnati. Thomas lost his wife 4 years before I met him. His children lived in different states. He was smart, capable, independent, and deeply proud of the fact that he was still handling life on his own. But when we looked more closely, he had been averaging fewer than 2 meaningful social interactions a week for years. His inflammatory markers were elevated. His sleep was poor. His appetite had faded. He had lost 11 pounds without trying. And when I asked him how he was doing, he told me he was fine. He was not fine. We didn't start with medication. We started with connection. We treated social contact the way we would treat any other health intervention. Specifically, intentionally, and with follow-through. Thomas joined a weekly woodworking group for retirees at a local hardware store. Not because woodworking itself was the cure, but because connection was. 6 months later, he had regained 7 of those pounds as lean mass. His inflammatory markers had improved. His mood was better. And one day he said something to me I have never forgotten. He said, "Doc, I forgot what it felt like to matter to people." That is the part no lab value can fully capture, but the body still responds to it. And the practical takeaway here is not vague. Research suggests there is a minimum threshold of meaningful contact that protects against some of the biological effects of loneliness. At least 3 to 5 meaningful social interactions a week, in person or by phone or video, can make a real difference. Not just casual background contact. Meaningful connection with people who know your name and actually care how you are doing. And frequency matters. One long conversation a week is good, but several brief points of contact spread across the week may be even better, because your nervous system needs regular signals of social safety, not just occasional relief. And here's what makes this number one. Social connection strengthens everything else on this list. It helps regulate cortisol, which supports circadian rhythm. It improves appetite, which makes protein intake easier. It lowers evening stress, which improves sleep. It gives men accountability and motivation to train, to walk, to show up, to stay engaged. Social connection is not just another factor in health. For many older men, it is the platform everything else sits on. So if you take only one message from this entire video, let it be this. Your relationships are not separate from your health. They are your health. They are written into your biology, reflected in your inflammation, your hormones, your sleep, your appetite, your energy, and even the way your cells age over time. And I want to close by speaking to you directly. Man to man, doctor to patient, human being to human being. Living alone does not have to mean decline. It does not have to mean isolation, invisibility, or surrender. The science I've shared today is not a verdict. It is a map. It shows where the risks are so you can move around them with clarity, intention, and strength. Every one of these 5 practices is actionable. Starting tomorrow morning, you can step outside into the early light. You can spread your protein across the day. You can protect your sleep instead of assuming poor sleep is just part of getting older. You can train for strength and power, not just movement. And you can make the courageous decision to stay connected to the people who remind you that your life still matters. The men I've seen thrive into their 80s and 90s are not always the ones with perfect genes, the most money, or the best access to specialists. More often, they are the ones who made a quiet but stubborn decision that their life was still worth investing in, that it was not too late, that each new morning was still a biological opportunity. You are not too old to improve your sleep. You are not too old to rebuild strength. You are not too far into solitude to reach back toward connection. It is not too late. I have seen this truth again and again in thousands of patients, and I'm telling you with the full weight of my clinical experience, the rest of your life can still become the strongest chapter of your story. If this video gave you something valuable today, one fact that surprised you, one habit you're ready to change, one person you now realize you need to call, then subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. We are here every single week with content designed for older adults who refuse to simply accept the standard story of aging. And leave me a comment below. Tell me your age. Tell me which of these 5 points hit you hardest. Tell me about someone in your life who needs to hear this. I read those comments, and they help shape what we create next.